The Devil's in the Details, Part 2, Keys to Transforming Yourself and Society. Devil's in the Details. If you haven't seen the previous 5 messages or so, or 4 messages, I want to do a fast review by saying just a few things here. First of all, God created the Adam, the man and the woman, for an intimate love relationship between God and themselves. Number 2, God is love, and to resemble God, the Adam was given the privilege of choice, which is the foundation of love. Number 3, when God gave the Adam the right to choose, he relinquished any form or influence of control over them. And then number 4 here, the dynamic of choice is between love and selfishness, or you could say it another way, altruism and ego. Which now brings us to this point. When we, the Adam, chose the egoistic serpent and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we created the world we now live in. In one respect, the world we now live in was originally God's creation, but if you remember, we were co-creators with God. The whole process, we were in the mix. However, we used our God-likeness and the power of choice. Remember, biblically, we're, again, co-creators with God, and subjected the paradise we were given to frustration. That's the King James word there. In Romans 8:20, in the Greek text, it says, Tegar meotiti he kitisis hupategi, which means, for an empty uselessness, the creation was put under arrangement. And if any Greek teachers are out there, sorry, I destroyed the Greek language at that point. It's this word, mateotiti, that we said is the word that we translate frustration in that segment. It literally means confused. It's the same word in Hebrew that's nakabusha, which means that we were confused. Why is that important? Because the entire world, including every aspect, was subjected to confusion when the ego began to rule. Thus, we established, let me go back to this point then. Because of our egoism, the tree of right and wrong, in other words, what we found out last week from our good rabbi, right? In other words, our fallen nature, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination as he calls it, it concealed our divine identity and divine reality. Egoism is the concealment. The New Testament calls it the flesh. The catch is, the reality of our inner image couldn't totally be contained. There was an awareness of something greater, and God began to break through at different moments. That would be called the reshimo, or the zacharun, that spiritual memory. I used the example of the glass of milk, if you remember, that once the milk is poured out, there's that residue. Well, even though we may be in a fallen state and egoistic, there's this residue of something. As we began to perceive glimpses of the true God, you could say the eternal, limitless Christ or Messiah, we began to fit that reality into the tree of knowledge of good and evil system. Once again, nakabusha, confusion. So either we perceived God or perceived a God that got very angry and wreaked judgment on mankind, or we saw God as simply good and the evils of this world came from something other than God or the gods. And while to a measure there is a truism in that notion, we created a mythology of a malevolent spirit, obviously outside of us, because we're still basically the good guys, right? So we personified the diabolos, which means through the fall. And we made it into a person that was completely and fully other than us. Which, if you think about it, is really egoistic too. Which is really the representation of that. So what did we do? We talked a bit about the center one there, the Baphomet, last week. And I think we touched on it the week before as well. But the point is that we then had to personify it outside of us to the point where we're the victims of it all the time. Something bad's happened, I'm the victim of the devil. Well, maybe in a truth, there is a truth to that, but maybe our perception of that, because of our own ego, is going to call that is actually flawed. And that's what we're going to deal with today. We're going to find the devil in the details again. So in this system of good and bad, right and wrong, when something went wrong, it was always the devil. That's just what we did. Let's take this next slide here. Then when the process developed to its fullness, God revealed himself through Jesus Christ, opening to us the true nature of the Father and our true identity. So all of a sudden, the devil issue began to change in the ministry of Jesus from the paganisms. But unfortunately, as Christianity began to move, we began to readapt those paganisms. In conclusion, we found that everything is connected, not just saved people, but all creation. I love this photo, if you remember it. I just really kind of shared it in a sense. Everything is connected. So picking up from the idea that everything's connected, may I first say, it helps to believe this, that, yeah, everything is connected. It helps to believe it, but I'm not after your beliefs. Because honestly, most of our Christian mythology is based on beliefs. It's about perception here. Or sensing reality as it is. Most of us are in different stages of grasping this reality, and many times it comes like waves of an ocean. I want you to consider something about the ocean for a minute as we start getting into today. The first aspect of the analogy is that what causes waves in an ocean? It's wind. Wind that blows across the surface of the ocean causes friction and creates the waves. And this makes the point that relates to the understanding that Jesus gives to Peter and us when he tells us that, Peter, you didn't receive this any other way but my Father in heaven. When Peter pronounces that Jesus is the Christ, you see the wind blew. Now the blowing of the wind of God's Spirit is, in a sense, you might say, what creates the waves in our lives. Yet, when a wave comes to shore, you can say to the natural world, two significant things happen as the wave breaks on the shore. There's an incoming water and a detracting water. And you can see that actually occur right there. Yep. See how that water goes out as the other one comes in? In the spiritual world, if you want to call it that, there's a phraseology that's used called ascents and descents. To ascend and to descend. Both are part of spiritual development. And in the same way, there's our true divine self, the one made in the image and likeness of God, or emanates the Father. And then there's the Yetzer Hara, our false sense of self, the emanation of the serpent or Satan or ego. Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And it's interesting, he pronounces Simon Bar-Jonah, which is Aramaic, which would be very similar in Hebrew. It would be Shimon ben Yonah, which would simply mean hearing son of the dove. Hearing. All of a sudden, guy who's going to be called Rock is hearing son of the dove. One is transforming into your true self. Two, understanding ascents and descents. And then three, transforming our society. Be willing to become completely honest with yourself. This is a real key here. As we stated earlier, this doesn't come by intellectual understanding a few weeks ago of a doctrine or theology, though that can help. It's a willingness to become completely honest with yourself. Notice something that if the book of Ephesians says, chapter 4, verse 17. This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk in the futility of your mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. There's a lot there, so I'm just going to run through it real quick. I want to first address the issue of the futility of your mind. Guess what? It's that same word that we talked about earlier just a few minutes ago in Romans 8. It's that emptiness, that confusion, in the confusion of their mind. Now, even though there's a progression, having their understanding darkened, alienated from the life of God, what I found years ago is that if I say it backwards, it makes sense. So, being past feeling. That's an interesting Greek word there. It's one Greek word for that all those three words there, being past feeling. Apoligikotes. And that means past the point of feeling, as in not having any sense of pain anymore. Not in a good thing. It's like when you hurt so bad, you just don't feel anymore. In modern colloquialism, we would say, who are in denial, having given themselves over. So if we start reversing it, because of the blindness of their heart. Now, I want you to consider something before we jump down to conclusions of what blindness of heart means. The Greek word cardia, heart, means feelings. It's either the blood pump in your chest or it's feelings. In other words, I'm not feeling anymore. Take that further. Because of the ignorance that is in them. You see, blindness, in this case, is not a deliberate act. It's an ignorance. I don't know what's in me. I've gone past feeling to the point where I can't sense the real me anymore. Take that further. Alienated from the life of God. Because of this ignorance, we've alienated ourselves from the life of God that is in us. It's not out there somewhere. It's still in here. Nothing's changed. As far as God's concerned, it's us that's made the shift. You could say we've alienated ourselves from the tree of life or the life of God in that respect. Then it says, having the understanding darkened. The word understanding is probably the second most misunderstood word, I think, in the New Testament. It's used 24 times in the New King James Bible, and only 3 times is this Greek word used. That's behind this word understanding. When we think of understanding, we think of a mental putting together of something. We put it together. We got it. Okay? That would be normally the Greek word synusian. It's put together. I get it. I understand it. That's not the word that's used here. Rather, the word that the Apostle Paul chose is dianoia. And dianoia means to sense deeply. To sense deeply. So why don't they sense deeply the life of God? Because of the serpent, the ego again. Because if you think about it, the last thing on the list, we'll talk about lewdness. We're going to deal with uncleanliness a little later on another topic. But greediness, we're right back to the ego-ness again. It's just a King James word way of saying it. Our egoistic desire to receive for ourselves alone has replaced our true self with another sensation. As long as that sensation prevails, which is why Jesus metaphorically tells us to take up our cross, our true sense of our true self is darkened. Thus, we are estranged from the life of God which is in us through the ignorance of its presence. And now I'm going back the other direction in the verse. Through the ignorance of its presence, because of the blindness of our ability to sense it, the heart, cardia, feel it. So all we do is give ourselves over to other egoistic sensations. As long as we're in the physical body, the ego will be present. However, the ego does create for us that choice. So rather than getting upset with ego, because that would still be egoistic, Rather than getting upset with the ego and your flesh, recognize this is this condition of, like, if you might say, and this is kind of a metaphorically, every morning you wake up, you get the choice of the two trees again. The difference is, prior to what we would call the fall, we lived in life and we got to choose between the two. Now we live in death, but we still get to choose between the two. Now, for the side note, if you thought choosing between good and evil is choice, it isn't. It's of the one system. That's the system we're in. That's what we want to break out of. So number 2, recognize something else here. We're going to talk about 3 specific things: information, revelation, and attainment. Under this point 1. Information is important, but it doesn't replace revelation. Most of us spend our time seeking information. Not bad. Nothing wrong with it. Let's not put a quality of good or evil, right or wrong on it. But information doesn't transform the ego. Doesn't transform us from one state to the other. Revelation will do that. Revelation transforms our perception of reality. I now see differently. But it isn't permanent. Kind of wish it was. Peter had a revelation from God that Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah. But he wasn't in a state of what the rabbis call attainment. The revelation became convoluted with his religious, egoistic thinking and missed the ultimate point. Jesus had to confront this egoistic religious thinking, saying, "Get behind me, Satan," the evil inclination, remember that? "For you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of man." It's very clear. So you can have, and a lot of us excitedly get revelations, but they become fleeting, and we, believe it or not, actually merge them back into the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and now that revelation goes back to Nakabusha, that we are now confused. But what's worse is the ego says, "I know something. I got it. Yeah. Ain't I cool? You should be like me." And the other ego coming back says, "What for?" And then the other ego turns around and says, "Because you should be like me, because I'm right." And the other ego turns around and says, "Psh, I'm right." And we both walk away and left the tree of knowledge of good and evil far in the distance. Or as we have a friend, Wendy Leonard, you know Lamont and Wendy, I like what she says. She goes, "Some people build tree houses in the tree of knowledge of good and evil." She goes, "Somebody got a house up in there." I said, "Yeah, well, a lot of us do." So the real element then of transforming our true self is this number 4. Attainment is the definition of true humility, the divine quality of Christ. This will cause revelation not only to be permanent, but an emanation of our true self. Humility, humbleness. And we, of course, see that in probably one of the most famous verses. We've talked about it here before, but for the sake of the continuity of the message, it just seemed to be appropriate to put it in here. This is the complete Jewish Bible translation. "Though he was in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God something to be possessed by force. On the contrary, he emptied himself and he humbled himself still more by becoming obedient even to death, the death on the stake as a criminal." Think of that humility. You see, we have this picture that when Jesus came to earth, I know I was taught this, that Jesus left his divinity behind and he just came as a man and lived by the rules to show us that we can. Not. Actually, it was quite different. Jesus revealed divinity through humility. That's why he could say, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." He always came to reveal. He never left divinity behind. He opened it to us. But the path to it wasn't living by the rules, but was by living in servant-like humility. So to transform yourself, to get point one completely done then, we have to become completely honest with ourselves. Recognize new information is important, but it doesn't replace revelation. Revelation transforms our perception of reality, but revelation isn't a permanent state of being unless we attain this quality, Christ-like quality called humility. That divine quality will cause revelation to be permanent in the respect that it now is an emanation through me, not an information I know. It's not a belief now. It's, for lack of a better word, a practice. Which brings us now to the next thing, which is ascents and descents. What's an ascent? And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through a bunch of Bible verses on this, but you definitely have this revealed to us several times in the Gospels with Jesus. Probably one of the most famous is him in the wilderness experience. But an ascent is when we are living focused on the goal. Now, I'm not saying that from the standpoint of being, what would be the word? Focused on the goal, meaning I've got a vision and purpose for my business. What I'm referring to is an ascent is when the goal is what? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. That's the goal. In simple definition, an ascent is when we are living from a focus point on the goal being an emanation of the Christ. This doesn't require positive or negative circumstances. It doesn't require long hours of Bible study or prayer, but a humble heart willing to face the true, if you will, good news gospel. Actually, I forgot who I don't remember if it was Peter Topless, who you haven't met yet. You'll meet him next week. And I were talking about the way we seem to treat the gospel, especially the one we've been preaching lately, is the almost too good to be true gospel. You know, we got to put a little wrath and judgment and condemnation in there, a little bit, just a little bit. But a humble heart willing to face the too good to be true gospel that you are an emanation of the Creator of all life. That's the goal. A descent is when we're no longer focused on the goal. Now, yes, we can have what we call wilderness experiences, but many times our wilderness and negative experiences occur as a realization that we've lost sight of the goal. But actually, when we realize it, it's been gone for quite some time. A descent isn't necessarily a negative experience. Rather, many times, a descent occurs in the positive experience. I'm going to submit to you that many times our worship, this is when our Christian religion comes in the picture. We come to church and we start worshiping, singing songs, we've actually descending. Even though it feels good and the anointing's present. Why? It's a mentality that because I got the breakthrough or have the correct information, all is well with the universe. Can you hear the subtlety of the ego in that? Yes, Lord, I got the breakthrough. Yeah. How many of us said, I know, I used to say this all the time. If I just got this and had this breakthrough of faith, I'll probably never doubt again. Yeah, and you get the breakthrough, and 2 days later, spiritual amnesia happens, and you're right back where you started again. That's a descent. Many times in the positive circumstance, we forget who we are. I'm not blaming positive circumstances only because we do it in negative either. The point is, circumstance has nothing to do with the focus on the goal. Kind of like the notion, we've talked about this before, Peter walking on the water with Jesus. Oh, he got his eyes off of Jesus because of the storm. He couldn't walk on the water if it was a calm day.
Very true.
Circumstances have nothing to do with the focus on the goal, really. Which brings us to this, number 3. Neither negative or positive circumstance determine our sensation of our true self in Christ, but our honest humility of. You can't be honest with God and dishonest with yourself. You can't be honest with yourself and lie to God. They're connected. Everything is connected. Let's talk now about number 3, transforming our society. So we talked about a touch of how to transform ourselves. And really, I don't even like the word transform as much as that's more of an external word. Somebody looks at you and looks at your transformation. But really, from a standpoint of spirituality, it's an uncovering of what's there. All right? Ascents and descents, then, is that focus on us being an emanation of the Father. Circumstances have nothing really to do with it. Only the ego tells us circumstances have something to do with it. Something bad must have happened because you messed up. Something good must have happened because you prayed right. But transforming our society now, and probably the most famous verse of Scripture for me that deals with this is Mark chapter 5. So we're going to go through this real fast. Then they came to the other side of the sea. Now, as a quickie, we've talked about some of this before. Some of you have maybe not heard it. But the idea of coming to the other side is a Hebrew idiom, and it is the Hebrew word ivari, which is the word we get Hebrew from. It's a crossing over. And many times when you hear the phrase to cross over, it's telling us, it's a spiritual marker saying what we're going to discuss now really isn't so much about the physical, it's about the spiritual world. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, neither could anyone, keyword, tame him. And always, I want to point out to you that this word unclean spirit, here we go again, our mythology takes over. It means it's a demon that's in controlling him. The phrase unclean, arkarthanartu, actually is a decree that the Pharisaical law gives somebody when they're like non-repentant. You are an unclean spirit. So what's involved here is not just a moral wrongness or some kind of, I've got a demon, I'm walking around in the tombs. There's a reason for this. It's that he can't be expiated or forgiven by the law's ritual cleansing. So consider the state of mind in this guy, because what happens, it says, he was in this condition night and day, and he was in the mountains and in the tombs crying out and cutting himself with stones. That's a real interesting phrase, cutting himself with stones. You see, at this point, what's going to happen is he's going to see Jesus from afar, he's going to run and worship him, and he's going to cry out with a loud voice, "What do we have to do with you, Son of the Most High? I implore you by God that you do not torment me." Now think this through for a minute. Again, let's remove the mythological side of this, and let's maybe see this from a spiritual point of view. It's interesting, this man sees the revelation of love, Jesus, the compassion of the Father, Jesus, and his reaction to it is, "Don't torment me." It says he was cutting himself. From a psychological point of view, and this is actually from the Mental Health of America, which was formed back in 1909, it says, quote, "People who self-injure commonly report they feel empty inside," isn't that we just said out of Ephesians, "unable to express their feelings, and fearful of intimate relationships." So the ultimate intimate relationship shows up, and to him that's a torment. He's cutting himself because he loathes himself. The guy clearly had an issue with himself, and his religious system judged him unclean. How much worse can it get when your only hope you think in religion is God, your God, and the religious folks are telling you, sorry. Lady Gaga, during her anti-bullying campaign, after producing her album Born This Way, she played a frightening video, and I happened to see it in a concert that she was televising. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find it on YouTube, otherwise I'll let you see it. She played a 14-year-old boy who reached out to her because he was contemplating suicide. He tells her in the video that the Christian group at his school told him he had a demon and he was going to burn in hell. He shares his self-loathing and desperation, concluding that if he's destined for hell, maybe suicide will show his sincerity and he can avoid it. Yeah. What have we done? How have we tormented people? I don't care. You know, we can say, well, that was the law. Ah, come on, we do that too. What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me. See, his picture, even though love was right there, his picture of God was his torment. That's why you've heard me say things like on occasion, I say it again, just to consider. I don't like ISIS. I don't like the notion of them putting people in prison and setting them on fire or cutting off heads. But you know, while that's bad, it's no better telling people you're going to burn in hell. It's no better condemning people because of their sin. You might as well cut off their head. At least you'll put them out of their misery a heck of a lot longer. It's the same system of belief. And if you start rewinding the way we've behaved, at times I say we because I'm talking about churchianity, that many of us, you know, we ebb and flow through it. We turn on the TV, we don't even realize sometimes we're listening to something other than the gospel. You know, Wagner in the first act of his opera Parsifal points out that when religion has victimized someone, their view of love only adds to their self-loathing. You can't love me. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. Reconsider the phrase, come out of the man, unclean spirit now. Was it really about some demon? In the usual sense of the word? Or are we talking about that whole spiritual persona that he has of self-loathing and religious condemnation come out of the man? We then find out, after he says that, he asked him, what is your name? And he answered saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. Now, as a side note, our legion roughly is 5,500 men. They're usually broken up into 10 cohorts in the Roman army. He says, we are legion, for we are many. Now, let's go to the next page here. Also, he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country or the region. Now, all of a sudden, consider, what's going on inside the man is connected to the community. It's connected to society. And where is he society-wise? We just talked about the legion being 10 cohorts. Well, he's in the city called Decapolis, the city of 10. So what's in him is directly connected to the society he's connected to. Notice at this point, because at this point it says, now there's a large herd of swine feeding near the mountain, so all the demons begged him, saying, send us into the swine that we may enter him. And at once Jesus gave them permission. I want you to notice something. Jesus did not get the apostles together and have a prayer meeting, an intercessory prayer meeting at this point to break the power of the Spirit over the 10 cities. You come down, you foul spirit, over that city, blah, blah, blah. Jesus didn't even do that stuff. Why? He didn't live in a mythology. He dealt with real things. He dealt with the real element, which requires a whole lot more spiritual horsepower than shouting at the clouds. When we see the symptom of the condition of the region based on the inner condition of the man, the legion requests to be sent into pigs, which is a religious symbol of total uncleanness. Unredeemable uncleanness. You just don't eat that, which is exactly how this man was feeling about himself. There's your real demon. And interestingly, Jesus concurred for no other reason but to deal with the true picture of the situation. And it then says, check this out, at once Jesus gave him permission, verse 13, then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. Another marker. Because the word 2,000, the word thousand in Hebrew is aluf. Aluf means to tame. Jesus is taming the situation. And it's 2,000 because in Hebrew, for whenever something is doubled, it's reached its place of perfection. In other words, for example, in Isaiah 26:3, you will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Perfect peace. There is no phrase perfect peace in Hebrew. Instead, you just simply say, as it says in the verse, shalom, shalom, peace, peace. When it's doubled, it's reached its perfection. So now he's saying, then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There are about 2,000. See, Jesus is not just healing a man, he's healing a region. And they went to a steep place, right, into the sea and drowned in the sea. And those who fed, watch what happens now. Those who fed the swine fled. And they told it into the city and the country. And they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus, saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion. Notice the difference, who had been demon-possessed and the legion. There's a distinction. And the Greek actually brings out, there's a distinction. We'd lump them all together. Many translations lumps it all together. But there's a distinction between what was controlling the man and what was connected to the society. Many of us are trying to change society without changing us. Because I'm going to give you a major, I believe, biblical clue in just a moment. It's interesting, in Luke 8:35, it says, it adds something to this description. Verse 15, they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion sitting clothed in his right mind. In Luke 8:35, it adds sitting at his feet and in his right mind. Sitting at his feet, guess what that word means? Remember I said aloof means to tame? Well, if I just change how I say it from aloof to aleph, that means to learn. So not only is Jesus changing and taming, he's instructing, educating, discipling. Isn't that awesome? But what happened? They began to plead with him to depart from their region. Wait a minute. Say, oh, that's silly. Well, wait a minute. What did the man do? Jesus, did you come to torment me? You see, it's the same type of spirit. Get out of here. Can't have this here. It's the whole societal issue. And guess what? And when he got in the boat, I like this part. When he got in the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends, tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he's had compassion on you. He's turned this guy around. You see, I don't want you to get in the boat with me. You see, you don't need to follow me because you're going to go in the community and be me. This community that rejects compassion, unleash compassion. And what's going to frustrate them? They know you. And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis, there's the 10 cities, all that Jesus had done for him and marveled. This is why both Paul and Jesus tell us not to judge. Not because God has the right to judge and we don't. How many have said that? Well, we don't really have the right. Only God gets to judge. Okay, well, number one, to transform society, we must first see our true self as an emanation of the Father compassion. Which brings us to this. Number two, seeing yourself in truth will cause you to see others in their true state. I am convinced the reason why we're still critical of others is because we haven't seen our true self. You know, first, the whole notion, because what does judging do? Judgment always has a sense of finality. When I judge you, it's like taking a picture, a still picture. We're living like a movie. It's all moving. Everything is ebbing and flowing. Life is occurring. But when I judge, it's like taking a snapshot. And I take that snapshot of you, and I put it up on my wall, and guess what? 10 years from now, you haven't changed. Now, in real life, you may have been a completely different person. I remember dealing with a person who came to the church about something that happened 20 years ago. And ultimately, because this person who offended them came back into their sphere, they had a major upheaval in their life. Why? Because you took a picture. Because to them, they couldn't be okay because you're still caught 20 years ago in the picture. And the thing is, from a spiritual point of view, it's not just that face, but any resemblance of anything of that gets the same judgment. Seeing yourself in truth will cause you to see others in their truth or their true state. The man didn't want him to be tormented by this love. The community didn't want Jesus around. Wait a minute. I don't know about you. You think about it, but this is how it is. I mean, it's amazing how, the apostolic round that's about to happen. There are folks coming, and they could tell you stories of how people have left their church over the notion that God loves them. That if it wasn't mixed with damnation and burning, because we got to balance the truth with what? A lie? Got to balance love with some anger. We call it justice. The justice of God is redemptive. It is not incarceration. Because the other thing, if you even think about the notion of how we've taught hell, isn't that a judgment of permanency? How could that be true, especially if you read the last chapter of the book of Revelation? The regent didn't want Jesus to say, and Jesus' response was, hey, no problem. I'm out of here. Because I'm leaving me in this guy. And you know what's really cool about that? We find in the 15th chapter of Matthew, when Jesus goes back, guess what happens in Decapolis? They're running out into the streets, bringing people who are sick, hoping that Jesus' shadow would fall on them. They want prayer for all these people. Why? It wasn't because Jesus did anything, except Jesus was there through this guy, sharing what compassion looks like. So when the manifestation, if you want to call it that way, of Jesus shows up as Jesus, all of a sudden they're bringing people out of the woodwork. For lack of a better word, Jesus left a secret weapon. I also think that's a microcosm of really what the return of Jesus is going to be like. Rather than hellfire burn everything up and destroy it, a major reconciliation with humanity will be elevated to a whole nother level. You see, the scripture does say, 1 John 2:2, that this is now out of the New American Standard. He himself is we usually say propitiation of our sins. Okay, propitiation is actually a pagan word, a Greek pagan word, but what it's talking, it's the satisfying is really what we could put there. He himself is the satisfaction for our sins, not for ours only, but also for those of the whole world. The whole world. It's been satisfied. Not just the people who got their fire insurance. The entire Christ, for lack of, again, I'm using images here. Christ didn't just think it only saved people. Looked into the future and saw all those people that would be saved, and that's who he died for. No, he died for humanity. This is a humanity thing. Transforming your society is simply to transform a community or society, they must encounter true, persistent love. You see, if we think about it, the persistency of divine compassion, I'm intentionally not going to use the name Jesus or Christ for a minute. I'm going to use the term divine compassion. The persistency of divine compassion, when that man said, "Don't torment me," because of his misperception, didn't stop Jesus from dealing with the issue. Didn't stop, divine compassion from being persistent. And the whole time there was a bigger picture. Because if I can touch this one with divine compassion, I will transform a society. Because it didn't stop there. Because when the guys came, said, "Jesus, get out of here." He left the guy behind, right? Divine compassion never left. It persisted. To transform a community or society, they must encounter true, persistent love. And the only way they're going to encounter true, persistent love is if somebody is a recipient of true, persistent love. If we claim to be Christians, and true, persistent love touches lives and doesn't quit. Let's go to the extreme, just to make a picture. True, persistent love doesn't stand on the side of the road with a big sign saying, "Hey, there's a cliff coming." Because that's what we would say. "Oh, you know, true, persistent love, there's hell ahead of you." You know what true, persistent love would do? Get right out in the middle of the street and say, "Stop. To go through, you're going to have to go through me to get there." Isn't that what Jesus did? In one respect, isn't that what he did? I'm trying to put this in language we're familiar with. But basically, Jesus said, whatever you think hell may be, you're going to have to go through me to get there. And then he rose from the dead and said, "Guess you're not going." Because you couldn't kill life. You see, divine compassion, even in death, persisted. It's called resurrection.